Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Hey, we're back with more live from the Heartland for the week of April 15th. And now we're going to talk a little serious politics. We've got our friend on, Don Rose. I've been getting Don to come on the show many times over the last 4, 5, 10 years, filling us in on his view of things. And before we start today, Don, talking about the election of Brandon Johnson, etc., one of the things I like to do as a getting older fellow with a show is to record a little information about my friends, my comrades, my guests, how they got into the movement and a few of the things they've done. So how about giving us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been a leftist virtually all my life. In 1947, I was passing out leaflets for Henry Wallace for president, and dabbled with, various movements that were going on. I was not prominent in them, but I was a participant. I was also in the jazz world and got to know people like Charlie Parker. And so I was more or less immersed in some degree of Black culture, which gave me a lot of sympathy for, civil rights, whatever we called it back in those days. In the middle 50s, when I was living in Paris, I got to know Jimmy Baldwin, and that enhanced my immersion. And I participated in sit-ins and things like that. And when I came back to Chicago later in the 50s, there was a great white riots going on at the far south and southeast end of Chicago, where some Black people had moved into public housing there, and I was roped into. I joined a group that were trying to combat it and write leaflets and take them out there, hoping to calm the white tensions, and found out that we were hated more than the Black people were, because we were whats. Yeah. And so I was in and around it. In 1962, I met Timuel Black, and he later asked me to. We were most interested in jazz, and he had been just run something called the Rainbow Beach Wade-In. I don't know. A long forgotten movement. He ran for alderman in 1963 against one of Daley's old plantation guys. And I got heavily immersed in that and met quite a few people. We wound up, I helped assemble a group of independent Black aldermanic candidates. We only elected one of them that year. Unfortunately, it was not Tim. It was a guy named Charlie Chu. Later that year, we got involved in organizing for the March on Washington, the great one where King gave his famous speech.
And that was my first big event, going to that.
Continued on there. I tried to merge the Black movement, as I knew it, with a white independent movement. And I helped elect the first North Side independent alderman. In the meantime, in '68, I was part of the protest. I was the spokesperson, the media spokesperson for what was called the MOB, which was a large organization, familiar with it. It was there that, I gave Rennie Davis the line, the whole world is watching. So that's one of my live-on things. I also helped Tim Black create the term plantation politics.
Well, you've been quite a guy. I first knew you from the mobilization, and then off the Democratic convention, we've been running into each other and sometimes getting interviewed on the same show, et cetera, for a long time. And you've been a wonderful resource for this show, and I want to just thank you and acknowledge that. So we'll do more on your past. I wrote down here, let's have Don on talking about jazz sometime. But let's turn to this wonderful election here in Chicago. I had you on and Ed Mullen before the election, and both predicted a narrow Johnson victory. This was up against big money, media play, everything talking about Vallis was in the lead. And there was a lot of anxiety and trepidation going into the election on the part of a lot of people. And it didn't take long. We got the victory. Tell us a little bit about it. What's your take on the Johnson victory?
Well, of course, the polls were showing a 2 to 4 point lead for Vallis, which was within the margin of error. And I would say that I was not optimistic, but obviously he had a chance within the margin of error. And what happened, we later found that he was really leading in the mail-in ballots, as well as a tremendous election day effort, led by the Chicago Teachers Union and SEIU and a couple of other unions, who had a lot of people on the street overcoming whatever might have come in from the Vallis side. They just did not have the ground game, and we basically won it on election day on the ground game. So it could have gone the other way if Vallis had a better ground game and it beat us, but it was more, I think, the combination of the ground game and one hidden issue, which is back there. People didn't talk about it much, but the way I put it, both of these candidates were haunted not by what they were doing in the campaign itself, what they were saying in the campaign itself, but Johnson having expressed an interest in defunding the police and calling for a lot more taxes, and Vallis at one point saying that he was more of a Republican than a Democrat, and that he was personally opposed to abortion. Now, abortion is not anything a mayor of Chicago has anything to do about, but I believe that struck a chord at this particular time when the issue is so fraught, and all the money he was getting from the Republican side and so on pretty much proved that politically he was more of a Republican than a Democrat, at least certainly not a progressive Democrat, and that was the hidden thing that nobody would go to the polls saying, I'm voting for him because he's pro-abortion or anti-abortion, but this is an underlying thing throughout the country. It's a very sensitive and fraught time on the issue, and I would say that was the one issue that hasn't been analyzed yet. I wish we had a exit poll, but we don't. And some of these post-exit polls are not very accurate because people misremember things. But I think that was a thing that gave us what turned out to be the most historic, greatest progressive victory that we've had in a mayoral race. And I said, I confounded a few people when I said it even surpassed Harold's election.
Talk about that.
No disrespect. When we look back at Harold's election, although it's looked upon as a coalition victory, it was primarily a black victory. He carried all the black wards with 92, 93% of the vote. The white vote was only 9% of his victory, the white and Latino vote, only 9% of his victory. I have to say at that time, the Latino vote was minuscule. And he did not carry a single ward. He did, he got more votes in some lakefront wards, but this was fundamentally a black victory. You go to today, having gone through, the Obama election and a number of other things, outside the mayoralty, which has always stayed to the conservative or machine side. And suddenly, Johnson carried 29 wards, a majority of the wards in the city. He carried, there were, I think, 16 black wards, and the other 13 were mainly white, and there was a couple of Latino majority wards thrown in there. If you look at the vote, he carried everything, in effect, north of Belmont Street along the lake. Wards 44, which he flipped, that had earlier gone for Vallis in the first round. Ward 46, 48, and of course, you're familiar with Ward 49, one of the biggest victories in the city.
73% for Brandon.
Right. And then he carried the 47th, which is probably our most, outside the 49th, our most consistent independent progressive ward. It was a resounding victory, a huge majority, even though it was a relatively small vote. We only turned out 36%, I think, was the final count, or close to final count, compared to a gigantic vote in the Washington election.
Well, I kept thinking all along that even though there were a number of black aldermen who came out for Vallis, and former Black Panther Bobby Rush, not to mention Pat Quinn and Senator Durbin, but what hit me was I couldn't see the black community supporting Vallis, and they didn't. They went against their alderman, and clearly he got the majority of the black vote. He certainly got the 49th and a number of other places. What do you think now this means? What do you think, I'm not sure if we have all the figures about the aldermanic districts and how they went, but we have a new sizable progressive caucus growing in the city council. Brandon's coming in. He's had a lot of big union support. Where do you think things are going in town here?
Well, I would like to think that things are heading in a solid direction. I have to say, Brandon is inexperienced. As they were saying, he never ran things. By the way, Vallis got 20% of the black vote, which is quite creditable.
Well, all his ads were filled with black people. I mean, a lot of money, a lot of ads, all black people in his ads, mostly.
I want to comment on that, by the way. The overwhelming majority of the people who came out for Vallis, including the blacks, were people from the old machine. They were led by the 42nd and the 2nd and 42nd Ward aldermen, who are conservatives, old line machine guys. Riley was basically a Madigan guy, and the blacks who endorsed him were the older machine blacks. Jesse White, who was a wonderful guy and a benign figure, it came out of the old machine, and his alderman Burnett, another one, the one prominent alderman, a Latino alderman, Lopez, was a Burke guy. He was the one who would just pinned himself against everything against Laurie that could if she breathed in, he breathed out, and so it was kind of a reassembling of the old machine. A few surprises in there. I don't know what was in Bobby's mind, Bobby Rush, but we had to, if you remember, 4 years ago, he came out for Bill Daley.
Yeah,
So,
I'm sorry.
he's,
He changed. He got God and he changed.
I still love him in many ways. I helped him in his first runs for alderman and state rep, and until he finally won, so I go back a long way with him, just as I did with Chewy, who was my first choice.
Yeah.
Anyway, the question is going to be how he develops a relationship to the police department. I think the most important thing that's going to happen in the next month, I think he has to do it, is finding a new head of the police department. And he's got to juggle a near impossible thing, finding someone from inside who is trusted and yet who has a perspective of reform. And I don't know what's going on in there, but that's going to tell part of the story. He also has to get himself aligned with the business people who almost uniformly came out against him. I frankly do not think he's going to be able to impose any, if not many, of his taxes that he's proposed, which are, I should say, liberal unicorns from 10, 15 years ago, the LaSalle Street tax and so on. He might find some acceptable revenue. I would hope that they can get through a real estate transfer tax. And that is the beginning of the revenue that we need. He's not going to be able to do a lot without more revenue. He promises to continue and expand on Invest South and West, and that's going to depend on revenues. And I have to say, who he picks for his administration. By himself, I have, I should say, not mistrust, but misgivings about his abilities. He demonstrated ignorance in a lot of areas, although he was on the right track on race relations and policing and the way we go about solving the crime problem. So I have to say things are very, very much up in the air. He will have a working majority on the city council. I don't know whether they are going to follow through on declaring their independence, which they started to do just before the election or while the election was in process. We do have a strong council, weak mayor system, which we saw in effect when the Verdoliak 29 was running things in the most of the first term of Harold Washington. And if they're going to go in their own direction and keep their 28 committees that they set up and so on, I still think he has enough support there, and there are enough progressives to want to go through and do this. I'm particularly concerned about the real estate transfer tax and TIF reform. It's there for the taking if they can put it all together. I think those are the two major economic thrusts that we can do. But right now, I'd like to be slightly optimistic about the next 6 months, which are really going to define him.
I want to a couple of things that, as you were talking, when you mentioned Jesse White and then his alderman Burnett. We had Burnett on the show a long time ago. Nice guy. He's alderman of one of the poorest wards, and he's one of the most conservative. On Johnson, he
interestingly enough, he's an ex-convict.
Aha. Right. All the more reason to be conservative and cautious, I guess. But The other thing about Johnson is he really has started talking a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-class line. Like he really tries to include a lot of people. I'm wondering what you think are some of his, besides dealing with the police, any other initial projects or big moves? And while we're at it, why don't you maybe talk a little bit about our outgoing mayor?
Well, I think the big moves outside the police will be in what taxes he is able to get through, and working things out with the business community. And of course, fulfilling his promise about expanding Lori Lightfoot's Invest Southwest, which is a great idea. Not even though Harold expressed a need for it and a desire to do it, he died before he could do anything like it.
Let me ask you, we're going to run out of time, so there's a lot more to talk about, but what are the national ramifications of Johnson's election here in Chicago, as well as the election to the Supreme Court of a liberal up in Wisconsin, changing the control of that court?
I would say that this is a further extension of the abortion issue, and it may turn out, I think it can turn out positively for the Democrats in the long run, as we've seen it and the root cause of crime issue dominate now, and as its implications are very strong for the Democrats. We can, Wisconsin, for example, solidifies the blue wall. The blue wall, being the three big states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And I suspect Wisconsin is going to move away from its half-point victories for the Democrats to a significant victory, not as big as Michigan, but a decent victory next time. So these things make me optimistic about the presidency, but we don't know yet who's going to be running against whom, and so on and so forth. These are just harbingers, and I call them optimistic harbingers.
Don Rose, it's great talking to you. I'm going to throw one little last thing in. Do you have any view on how it came to be that Mayor Lightfoot going out has brought in racing, that downtown has turned into a racetrack during the summer? Bad decision, good decision? How did it come to be? We got to live with it.
I don't know where she came up with the idea. I'm very dubious about it. She's trying to bring something in, I think, that she thought might parallel some of the fests that previous mayors instituted, and she wanted this one to be hers. I don't know anybody who's really in love with that idea. So another misjudgment on her part, like, her greatest misjudgment to my mind was keeping her chief of police in. Her greatest positive judgment, of course, was going for Invest Southwest.
Well, Don Rose, it's always great to talk to you, and I'm sure I'll see you in person in the not too far off. And
very likely.
I'll be in touch with you real soon about coming on again.
Always glad to do it.
Right on, brother.